The Subaru Tribeca was the brand's first go at a three-row crossover, and it was a massive sales flop. But today I'm going to find out why that happened, and also I'm going to see if it's still relevant today. If you enjoy fun, detailed car content without the fluff, consider subscribing and hitting the bell for notifications. In my opinion, I think this was about the last weird Subaru that the brand has made. Part of that is because of what's under the hood. Whenever it was first released as the B9 Tribeca, you had a silky 3-liter Boxer 6, and that engine was less torquey and less powerful than this one. We have 256 horsepower, 247 pound-feet of torque, and that's going to come in the 3.6 liter from 2008 and up. I won't bog you down with too much history, but whenever this thing was first being developed, there was actually a Saab sister car supposedly going to be launched right around the same time. However, GM pulled out their stake in Fuji Heavy Industries, which GM also had a big stake in Saab too, so they decided to pull that project. And now that I think about it, this kind of does have some Saab vibes to it. The first car had Subaru's mustache grille, which looked good on the Impreza, but when put on the Tribeca, it had some sort of uncanny valley aspect to it.
Hi, how are you?
Although I'm sure some of you liked it, looks are all subjective, so tell me your thoughts in the comments section. That refresh came in for 2008, and they did that after just 2 years, mainly because, well, sales weren't great. Yes, this thing sold somewhere around 65,000 units in all 9 model years, which is substantially less than the 3-row Ascent sold in its first full year of production, or a third of what the Outback has been selling each year lately, making for the Tribeca to be quite rare, especially later models. If you want one, this clean example is for sale at Royal South Toyota in Bloomington, Indiana. The staff is friendly and their inventory is diverse. If you're in the market for a new Toyota or anything pre-owned, check out Royal South Toyota. This engine is paired with a 5-speed automatic in all years. I think response is honestly pretty good. Sometimes it does feel like, I wish this was a 6-speed automatic. It feels like there's a little gap in gearing. Come on, baby. Yeah, she don't want to kick down. There we go. Still, for a family car, this was more than acceptable for the time period. The unfortunate part, and one that definitely hurt the car early on, even though the first model years actually sold the best, the B9 Tribeca sold the best, you had to actually put in premium fuel. And the gas mileage here with the 3.6 liter was not really that good, although I should mention that other cars from the class at around this time didn't get particularly great gas mileage either. The automatic transmission here does have a sport mode if you slap it over to the side, and then you also can shift it manually. I like the flat 6 sound, and I definitely miss that. This engine was actually offered in the Subaru Outback up until the model year 2019, but I've only driven this engine with the CVT first gear, kind of tall gearing. Now in 2008, when they added the 3.6 liter, they did change the name to just Tribeca. Before that was B9 Tribeca. The B was supposed to stand for Boxer, and the 9 was like the chassis code or something. And then Tribeca was what is a neighborhood in New York, which is known for being a bit artsy and quite expensive. But goofy naming aside, I do want to see what this traditional automatic can do to 60 miles per hour with the 6-cylinder. All right, baby girl, you got this. It was kind of easier on the launch. Ooh, okay. The overall thrust there is linear, and I like that. But if you're like comparing it to a modern Subaru Outback XT or even a Subaru Ascent, I think those, when they're in boost, just have a little bit more punch. 0 to 60 came up in 8.1 seconds. Do I think I could have gotten an extra half second out of that if I did a full throttle brake torque launch? Yeah. Was I going to do that in a 100,000 miles super clean Subaru? No. That's also far from the purpose of this thing. The biggest standout from this engine is its refined, smooth nature. And that full-time all-wheel drive means consistent acceleration no matter the conditions. But if acceleration is a priority for you, some other competitors can get the job done in a second or so quicker. If you're comparing it to a Honda Pilot, it's gonna have similar thrust. In terms of trims, you had two to start out with, the base and the limited. But things were tweaked over the years, and you know, when this car was out, this 2011 model year, we had the premium trim as the base, then the limited, and then the touring. And all the touring added was HID headlamps, which this car is the touring, and silver roof rails. And it made the sunroof, that was an option, standard. There was a couple available packages, but overall, there are so many more trims and packages now than there ever were back then. By 2013 and 2014, Subaru knew the demise of this thing was soon, so they actually just gave you only the limited trim and offered different packages within it. And that makes sense. I think they were selling like 1,700 a year around then. When it came to off-road ability, it's no shock that this had standard all-wheel drive, but you also had a respectable 8.4 inches of ground clearance. But I think the approach angle here is gonna limit most of you. While the overall silhouette of the Tribeca is about as seductive as those barefoot shoes, I do dig the color and the correlation between these chrome bits here. It looks classy, and it is a very smooth looking vehicle, and I like how they continue this trend on the inside, but we'll get to that in a second. When it comes to features, yeah, keyless entry, but you didn't have like a smart proxy key, and there's no power rear tailgate available. In fact, really the only thing I can talk about is these 18-inch wheels, which they had different kinds, but they were all the same size. This simplicity may make it more desirable now, and it was more of the norm in 2006, but its competitors quickly surpassed the Subi's feature set. The Tribeca was also subpar when it came to passenger space and ergonomics, but the interior is at least quirky, especially up front with its curvaceous design. And the way that the dashboard kind of connects in here with the door panel is very interesting. Like, they were really going for a cockpit effect, and the result is somewhat compromised in space for, you know, the driver here. I am 6'3" though, and you know, I can roll back my seat plenty, but you have to be careful with that, because if you go back too far, the steering wheel becomes a really long reach because there is no telescopic steering wheel in here. It is tilt only. And there's some other weird features to this thing, like these climate controls, which remind me of like a rotary dial phone, and it's actually kind of satisfying and fun to use. I feel like I've seen these controls in one other place before, but I can't quite remember where. It's a pretty easy little layout here to get used to. This thing is supposed to come with Bluetooth standard on limited and touring trims. However, I don't see it anywhere in this one. Oh, that's interesting. The car, when it first came out, didn't have Bluetooth, so instead of making it integrated into the steering wheel, I've never seen that before.
Select one of the following. Pairing options. Confirmation prompts.
Well, I got it hooked up and it works, but I think the system is a Bluetooth call only, not a Bluetooth audio. Tribeca stands, correct me in the comments. That kind of sounds like a country. For 2007, you got an aux port standard in here. You had 6 speakers as well, or there was a 9-speaker upgraded audio system that later became the Harman Kardon sound system. That was a 10-speaker unit, and that's what's in this car. This sound system works okay, but it is a far cry from the Harman Kardon units used in like a new Subaru Ascent or Outback. The Tribeca cabin also takes a couple steps away from the usual Subaru ethos of the time. The only 2 pieces in here that really remind me of other Subarus are the steering wheel and the shifter. This looks like the era Subaru. When it comes to features, this model year, all cars had the weather package, which means heated seats and like heated defrosters for the windshield wipers. A nice touch. All cars had lumbar adjustment. Oddly enough, that came for both front passengers. Premium or base buyers got cloth seats, everyone else got leather. There was also an optional package for navigation on that limited trim, which I'm sure works great now. My car here does not have that. It does have the backup camera. It's built into the mirror. If we're looking at materials, I was honestly thinking with 100,000 miles that this would be creaky and panels would be all weirdly gapped, which granted the fit and finish in here is not excellent. It actually has held up over the years pretty well, especially these seats. Like, this is in great shape. The plastics in here are pretty cheap, especially on the dashboard, but just don't grab your dashboard very often. The center console's soft, the door panels are but it feels like a durable interior. Really, the only complaint that I have in terms of comfort, because these seats are pretty good. There's not really any like bolstering, but family car, why do you need it? The real issue is just that cockpit feel. I feel like for larger people, both tall and wide, this just wouldn't really work that well over the long run, especially with the tilt wheel only. Maybe that's something that you can get used to. I did myself. But if you're bigger, the Toyota Highlander is going to have better ergonomics for you. But to my knowledge, no other car in the class gives you a dedicated car door graphic on the dashboard, or cool gauges on the outside of the cluster. Unfortunately, these things don't make up for the back seats. Sitting behind myself in the second row seat, I have less room in here than most small SUVs currently. Now, at the very least, I can fit my knees to the side of these seats, and there is padding here. But, you know, if you have large child seats, this could be an issue. If you just have larger people or you're going on a longer distance trip, this won't be ideal. It is reasonably wide, and I like how the middle seat here isn't neglected like it is in some other vehicles. Plus, you had a separate little AC system that is just called rear cool with only fan speed operation. And the vents are actually up here in both the second and third row. Whenever this car came out, it actually was offered in a 5-passenger or 7-passenger version that had slightly varying features between the two. Like, for instance, you could get a rear entertainment system with the 7-passenger version. The rear cooler also only came with third row models. And for 2010, both of those came on all Tribecas. And that's fine, but I mean, this is just tight for a 2-row SUV. So now I'm gonna try to sit behind myself in the third row. It may look cramped, but honestly, this is better than what I was thinking. And when you consider what else was offered in this class, the space here is actually tall. At my height, I could sit back here in a pinch. But to be fair, 75% of those now old crossovers offer a similar level of pain for large occupants. And this has a 40-20-40 split second row. So I can do that. And now I can put my knee here. The cargo area of the Subaru Tribeca is surprisingly reasonable, but still, even with our third row folded now, this is going to be lacking compared to a Honda Pilot, Toyota Highlander, and most of the class. It's just not so much so to where it draws attention to itself. And again, you have more practicality here through the 40-20-40 split rear seat there. And when I fold the back row, you'll also notice you have little plastic trays to make it a little bit more of a rugged place back here, although the carpet won't exactly help that. Plus, it seems like the seats back here, they get caught on this rear tray pretty easily and break, but at least the seats actually fold quite flat in the back of the Tribeca. No part of this interior really feels spacious. Back then, I feel like that was one of the major contributing factors to why this thing didn't do so well. I feel like people may have looked at the second row and the third row and just came to the conclusion that the Outback has 2 rows, but both of them are more usable and it gets a lot better gas mileage. And if you wanted something more utilitarian, both the Outback and the Forester were cheaper. And if you wanted 3 rows, there are already several options in the segment at that point that just had it down better. Still, I appreciate this thing. So now we're on a rough, uneven road with some tight corners. The Subaru Tribeca is soft, definitely. It's comfortable. You know, even though this model has over 100,000 miles, it handles over here just fine. I definitely think it's on par with the old Toyota Highlander I drove. Might be a little bit more suspension noise than in that car. Parts are probably old. Yeah, okay. These imperfections definitely make their way into the cabin, but none of them have come off jarring, and the car still feels very composed going through them. So I do need to give points to Subaru for that. And around back roads, it's also still okay. It's a softly sprung car. I'm sure that the flat 6 engine there helps with body roll a little bit. However, there's still a moderate amount of body motion going on. The steering isn't super slow, and it actually still retains a relatively precise feeling. I'm actually kind of surprised by that, given the age. It's also well weighted, but it doesn't really build up. It comes off a bit unnatural. It's numb. Yeah, if you're looking for a sporty experience, and this was on par with other Subaru SUVs of the era outside of the Forester XT, but you're not gonna find a enthusiastic experience behind the wheel of the Tribeca. But if you live in the mountains, I think that the Subaru Tribeca is still a good option. Feels pretty planted, to be honest. There's a little bit of loose rocks and stuff on this road, but it gets down the road the way that I would want it to, really. Looking around, at least the visibility here is really quite good. Relatively low windows here, giant mirrors. Okay, tall mirrors. They don't extend very far, but they're very tall, which is odd. But I have a very good view of the road. The windshield here is huge.
And on the highway, road noise is competitive for the class.
It doesn't necessarily fall behind really in any regard on road, and with their standard symmetrical all-wheel drive, this thing was quite capable in off-road scenarios. However, you're still limited there by the body style.
So it can't rely on the brand's go-get-'em attitude as its distinguishing factor here. When it comes to reliability, data is limited but somewhat promising. I'm seeing fairly consistent but not excessive reports of oil seepage from valve cover, oil pan, and timing cover gaskets, but no immense oil consumption or head gasket failure. The 5-speed auto has generated some complaints for shuddering, which would likely be torque converter related, but I'm not seeing much on that either. It seems like there are more insignificant random issues than anything. If reliability is a high priority, given the problems that other cars in the class suffered, I'd predict this to be a little better than average, which brings me to my last point. The Tribeca is niche, yet boring. Capable, yet compromised.
When you had, other cars in the class like the Highlander, which offered more power and space while also retaining a somewhat small footprint, or the Mazda CX-9, which was also small but had a more fun personality.
And there was the Pilot that provided good handling and a highly practical interior. The Traverse was also more spacious and more efficient, which is great until your AC breaks along with the timing chain. But you get what I mean, and all of these towed 1,500 pounds more than the Tribeca's 3,500 max.
I can see why in terms of selling volume at least, this just didn't do all that well, but I am still drawn to it.
While still competitive, it can't claim to be more zippy than its foes, more affordable, or more efficient. And it really only trips up on the biggest thing people care about in the class: space for a family. These things considered, there's no part of me that believes this was an underappreciated car. This was a good crossover, but it flopped because it wasn't practical enough to meet our standards, and none of its other attributes were strong enough to carry it to success. But if you have smaller children or don't mind a personal cabin, you just want 3 rows for occasional use, and you want something different, a little weird maybe, something confident with standard full-time all-wheel drive, the silky smooth engine, and an overall laid-back on-road personality, the Tribeca is a perfect fit. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed it to help me with the increasingly challenging YouTube algorithm. Subscribe and hit the bell for more. I'll catch you in the next one.